Welcome everyone to this introduction to developer productivity engineering in Android. So, what exactly is developer productivity engineering? This is the use of engineering practices to solve problems around developer productivity. And productivity denotes how engaged our minds are on a particular task. So the more time you get to focus on interesting and challenging problems, and the less time you get to focus on repetitive and mindless tasks, the more productive you are. And a more technical explanation of what DPE is it is the discipline of using data to optimize software development practices, thereby improving the happiness and enhancing the productivity of software developers. So the key things to keep in mind here are data that we use to improve our software development practices, ensuring that developers are happy, and enhancing the productivity of the same software developers. Developer productivity engineering is a culture shift. So the job of developer productivity engineering is to improve productivity through the entire life cycle from the IDE to production. One thing to keep in mind is very often CI/CD teams are not responsible for developer productivity and only make decisions that optimize for other metrics without necessarily considering the effects that these metrics might have on our developers' productivity. For a team to be successful, it needs a culture where the whole organization commits to improving developer productivity. And as I was mentioning earlier, when you think about CI/CD teams, their priorities and success criteria are primarily based on data that comes from a fully instrumented toolchain. So the thing is this, you might have a fully instrumented toolchain, but that does not necessarily translate into you actively practicing developer productivity. So that's one thing you need to keep in mind. This is generally a culture shift, and it's normally sort of a learning curve for teams that haven't been implementing this as part of their development process. All right. So DPE is a bridge. There's a significant gap between actual productivity of software development teams and their full potential. So what DPE does is that it bridges this gap between the actual productivity of software development teams and their full potential. So this gap is growing over the lifetime of a project for most organizations, but it can be significantly reduced with the practice of DPE. So yeah, as your product continues to grow, as you continue to add lines of code, as you continue to add and grow your teams, you find that the gap between the actual productivity of software and their full potential continues to grow. So this is another case for why you need to be very deliberate about implementing developer productivity engineering as part of your teams, or even as part of your development as a solo developer. And the other point is that developer productivity engineering improves developer happiness. The happiness of your developers actually depends on their productivity. And organizations that cannot provide such an environment are seeing a drain of talent, leading to even lower productivity. So as you can see, if you do not implement these practices of developer productivity engineering, it actually hurts you in the long run, in that you end up losing some of your top talent because they don't feel productive and you're not fully utilizing their potential in terms of productivity. And you'll find that most developers want to work in an environment that enables them to work at their full potential. DPE has economic impact on your business. This is an interesting one because the economic benefits of not applying this practice are dramatic, in that it impacts the amount of features that you're able to ship. Innovation is at the heart of any business that desires to thrive in the market. And the productivity gap that comes from not applying the practice of developer productivity engineering is a significant competitive disadvantage, in that if your developers are not productive, if somewhere along the build tool chain there seems to be constriction or certain roadblocks for your developers, they won't be able to ship out features as fast as possible. You won't be able to satisfy your customers' needs. And when your customers are not happy, it means that you're not making money. They're not willing to pay for your product. And you'll find that sales reduce, or your daily active users go lower, and you find that you're actually having a negative impact on your business. So you see, if you can actually implement DPE and ensure that your developers are not restricted in any way, you can maximize on their full potential. And in the long run, it actually helps you to leverage every dollar that you've invested into software development. And finally, it means that the productivity of your software development teams is crucial for your business to survive, as I had mentioned earlier. All right, so right now we'll look at what the developer productivity engineering landscape looks like. And as you can see on the left of the screen, there's the area in which application development happens. And then we move into the build, test, and CI/CD space as we move towards the right. And as you can see, developer productivity engineering spans from the coding point of view all the way into CI/CD. And right below there, you can see the DevOps space, which spans from CI/CD all the way to deployment and scaling. And the thing you need to consider here is sometimes CI/CD teams just or rather DevOps teams just focus on one aspect of developer productivity engineering, but do not cover the whole scope. And that's why, as you can see, DPE moves all the way from your coding on the IDE, building, running your builds, testing, running tests for your product, and also the CI/CD aspect of it. So without that key component of developer productivity engineering in your teams, you'll be losing a lot in terms of ensuring that your developers are as productive as they can be. Great, so something key to note is productivity equals happiness. And in this case, it's developer happiness. So the more productive your engineers feel, and the more they get to focus on interesting challenges and problems, and the less time they get to focus on the repetitive and mindless tasks, the more productive they are. And the more productive they are, the happier they are working on your team. And a key component of developer productivity engineering is automation. We use automation to get rid of the grunt work. This is basically the repetitive and the mindless tasks. But the thing you should note about automation is in developer productivity engineering, it's not just about automation, but automation is a big part of it. And right now, I'd like us to briefly discuss the developer productivity engineering framework, and it's split up into 3 key points. The first one being identify. And in this case, you need to identify the productivity bottlenecks. So the way you can do this is through, especially in a team setting, you can do this through sprint retrospectives or having like one-on-ones with your teammates, just to ask them what aspects of the developer toolchain do they have problems with. And once you're able to note those down, you're able to identify those productivity bottlenecks that seem to be affecting the different members of your team. So a good candidate for tasks that are causing productivity bottlenecks are tasks that meet the following criteria. You can ask yourself a question: is a task manual? Is a task repetitive? And is a task automatable? So if you have any tasks that meet this criteria, those are good candidates for productivity bottlenecks. The next key point is measure. And in this case, you will get to measure productivity. And in terms of measuring productivity, you use sort of like an indirect approach where you focus on things that are negatively impacting your productivity and you try to reduce those things. And that's what I mean by measuring productivity. And finally, prioritize. And here we prioritize according to cost. So in this particular moment, we've identified our particular productivity bottlenecks. We've been able to focus on the things that were negatively impacting productivity. That's where we measure. And then finally, we get to prioritize. So we're prioritizing according to cost. So cost in this case is something like implementation cost. Like how many hours will I take to implement a solution or to come up with a solution? And also maintenance cost, like how many hours will it take me to maintain this solution? Because one thing you need to realize about developer productivity engineering is that it's not a one-time affair, but it's something that you constantly do as your team continues to grow, as your product continues to evolve, and as your code base continues to grow. So you'll need to keep prioritizing the particular cost, whether it's the implementation cost, the maintenance cost. Another cost you can consider is the onboarding cost, like how long would it take a new engineer to perform this particular task? And in this case, you wouldn't want only one person in your team to be able to do certain tasks around developer productivity engineering. It's important for you to share this knowledge across your whole team. Yeah, this is the framework: identify, measure, and prioritize. What will we learn and try to achieve as we go through this particular series of videos? The first one is we'll be able to understand the importance of fast feedback cycles and the early discovery of bugs. And this is essential, especially when you're trying to ensure that your developers are productive. You need to have fast feedback cycles. And in this case, you just ensure that your builds are blazingly fast for your developers to be able to get fast feedback, to be able to act on it. And if there are any bugs in their code, they'll be able to discover it early on. Secondly, we will learn how to quantify the costs of low productivity development environments that waste time waiting for slow builds, tests, and CI/CD pipeline. I'll give you guys a real-life example for the current company that I work for, how we had really slow builds and how we were able to quantify the costs of having such a low productivity development environment. Next, we will organize the data required to understand, troubleshoot, and improve essential development processes like builds, tests, and CI/CD pipelines. We will also use acceleration technologies like caching and distribution to speed up feedback cycles. We will use data proactively to improve the reliability of the development toolchain. And finally, we'll find and eliminate frequent errors and noisy signals like flaky tests. So, this is the parting shot. Developer productivity engineering is about the developer experience, unlocking the creative flow and restoring the joy of development, as well as the collaboration with the business. And with that, I've come to the end of the introduction to developer productivity engineering. I hope you will stick around with me as we go through this particular video series and as we dive in depth into the different core areas of developer productivity engineering in Android. Thank you.